ba, 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 ba. Ba, 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 ba. And here we are. Hey team, welcome to another episode of Kinstretch with the Fitness Alchemists. We're so excited to have you join us here today to work on some really juicy hip extension flavored Kinstretch setups. This is one that a lot of people identify as being a limiting factor. If you're someone who's ever been told you have tight hip flexors or you have tight psoas, that stuff is all going to limit your hip extension. So we're going to try to work on that stuff today. In terms of props, you're going to want the thickest pillow you can find. We have a meditation pillow here that works great, but also like a pillow you would sleep on and just fold it in half. That would work great. Again, the stiffer and thicker that pillow, the better. Also, a lovely yoga block or something similar will be helpful for hand placement later on. And then if you can set up near a couch, it might be helpful for a little leverage. Definitely not needed, but I'll show you how we would make use of that a little later. Okay, so we're going to start out just with some gentle spinal CARs, get things moving, and find hands and knees position on the floor. Feel your hand pressure and your foot pressure, and then use those pressure points, keep them consistent, and start to curl your tailbone under. And really try to go segmentally. So really imagine moving and opening the backside of each and every vertebral segment. The more you do these, the more you might notice spots that are resistant to movement. And for now, it's fine to just notice that they're there. No need to really crank into them yet. Keep your hand and feet heavy as you start going the other way into spinal extension. Actively reaching your belly button forward. Oh, that was my mic. Actively reaching your tail feathers to the ceiling. Good. Okay, now as you finish up this first rep, take a moment to actively reach your sternum forward, actively reach your collarbones forward and up, and try to specifically feel some contraction in your upper back. And then hold on to that as you start curling your tailbone under again. So you basically have set up a little self-resistance to make that curl under, that flexion, a little bit more specific to the bottom of your spine. And then with control, move up your spinal column, vertebrae by vertebrae. Very nice. One topic that keeps coming up as I introduce these to folks is that our nervous system is really housed in our spinal column, in those vertebrae. So as we do these, yeah, you're moving your spinal joints, very important, but you're also gently warming up and lighting up your nervous system. Such a critical component of all the function that we ask our bodies to do. So it's a good idea, whether you're going to do a Kinstretch class or you're just getting ready for your day, try to get your nervous system moving. Finish up that second rep into extension. And on your final trip up your spine, you're going to see if you can't use a little bit more pressure through your hands and your feet. Try to turn on as many muscles as you can throughout your upper body and your lower body. The more that you have access to, the more effective the Kinstretch will be a little bit later on. Good. Finish up your final rep into extension, and then we are going to work on some hip CARs. So go ahead, come down into a side lying position. You can grab that pillow and take a moment to brace your upper body. Feel some tension. If you have that block and you want to hold on to it, that's always a nice idea. And then begin by pulling your knee up towards your armpit. So just try to feel your hip flex, then reach your shin to the ceiling, sweep your heel behind you, not letting your knee drop if you can help it. And keep that upper body braced so that your pelvis isn't moving. Finish up that full rotation, bringing the knee all the way around, touching knee to knee, pause, and then let's go the other way. So we're going to tick-tock today. And as you go back behind you, I want you to just take one moment to pause in hip extension with your heel as far behind you as you can. Try to feel that your tailbone is going to want to exaggerate that movement by moving behind you and arching your back, but resist that and see if you can't use that to find more stretch on the front of your hip. And then let's keep going, shin to the ceiling. Smoothly bringing that kneecap around towards your armpit, then towards your sternum, and across your belly button line. We're just going to do one more. So really brace, use that top arm in particular, because that will light up all the tissue that keeps your pelvis in place. And do a second rep, carving out all of the space that you have available to use in your hip. As you move back into extension, try to notice that same stretch feeling. And then we're going to again do a hold as you reach your heel back. So find that stretch on the front of your hip. Feel what brace is required to not let your spine move. And now try to charge up a little bit more butt squeeze and hamstring tension to help you really reach behind you and up as you finish up this rep. So that also gives you an idea of the shape that we're going to be working on today, the joint position. Go ahead and flip over to the other side. All right, and let's get started on the hip CARs on this other side. Start by reaching your knee up towards your armpit. Feel that hip crease shortening and contracting, and then shin to the ceiling. Keep that height in your knee as you start to rotate your thigh and send your heel behind you. Feeling your glutes begin to squeeze, your hamstrings squeezing, and keeping the knee bend in your knee the same as you go back through extension. And then pause with the knees touched together and reverse. Now we are going to pause in extension as you reach that heel back. Maximize the stretch you feel on the front of your hip. Keep your spine in place and then start to move. So we just have one moment of touching base on your hip extension and what's available there. Okay, and then second rep, turn on your upper body brace a little bit more. Sometimes I like to think of leaning forward into my hands or into the block if you're using a block. So you're not just pushing down, but you're actually leaning your body weight into that pressure. See if that doesn't spill over a little bit more usable tension that you can use to move your leg around. And then as you go in reverse, drive that heel behind you and come to a complete stop in hip extension. Notice exactly where that line of tension is on the front of your hip, and also notice what is contracting on the back of your hip, and then use that to begin moving your shin up to the ceiling and finishing up this second hip CAR. Great. So that should be sufficient to warm things up and kind of give you a lay of the land. And now we're going to move into a 90-90 position. Okay, we're going to be working on the back leg. Now, anytime we want to work on a linear angle on your body, like hip extension, we actually want to start a little deeper and focus in on rotation. Because if we maximize rotation, it means we've maximized the space that we can use to stretch into extension. So get into a comfortable 90-90. If you want to bend your front knee, you can. And if you do have a yoga block, you want to grab that with that trailing arm side, because that'll help. And we're going to just start by turning your pelvis to face towards that back shin as much as you can. If you need to take a few passes at this, that's totally fine. Just turning forward and back. And notice that as your pelvis turns, your thigh is forced to essentially rotate relative to that pelvis. So we're able to train and stretch into internal rotation without actually moving the leg, but just moving the pelvis. Okay? And then take a moment, and if you have that block, or if you just want to use your fist, try to create some pressure against that calf you're using a block, it would look like this. Hannah calls it the arm extender. Okay, find what position helps you, because if we can create a little distraction of the thigh bone coming out of the hip socket, it's not actually dislocating, it's just creating a little more space, then you might feel that you can turn even just a little bit more and relax into a stretch. So we are really trying to access the deepest part of your hip. Sometimes it's useful to think of it as the most vulnerable part of your hip, the most hidden part of your hip. So pushing hard and cranking and really pissing that tissue off is not going to help you get into that tissue. We really need to relax into it. Take a few more breaths, in for 3 or 4 counts, out for 8 to 10 counts. So you're really extending the exhale and telling your nervous system what you'd like it to do, which is relax, chill out. Good. Okay. Now, from this newly found end range position, we're just going to do a light set of pails to try to maximize the activity of this tissue. So keep your setup, keep your brace if you're using the block or the hand, and lightly begin pushing your back foot into the floor. And use that to zone in on a rotational request on the hip joint. As you start to feel that downward pressure, add to it a little downward pressure of your knee. And then add to both pressure points as you ramp up that rotational contraction. Ramp it up to 30%, 40%, 50%, and then right up to 60% and hold it there. So this should be enough that the rest of your body is working, your arms are working, your body's on tension, it would maybe like to relax, but you're just holding that consistent pressure into the floor. 5, 4, 3, 2, and now gradually relax that contraction and notice if you can sit into a little bit more rotation, or maybe this end range position just feels a little bit more accessible. That's an improvement as well. Okay, great. Let's just try one more little one. Start pressing your back ankle down, your back knee down. Use that to lock into a rotational contraction. Ramp it up smoothly through 30%, 40%, 50%. And again, we're going to park it at 60% effort and hold that contraction. Trying to specifically talk to that deepest part of your hip. 5, 4, 3, 2. Slowly feel that contraction ebb away and finish up in a relaxed position. Good. All right, take your time and go ahead, come out of this setup. And we're going to get the same contractions in for the other hip. Yeah, it might feel a little creaky when you get out of that position at end range. All right, so on this side, again, if it feels good to bend your front knee, go ahead. Then begin turning your pelvis towards that back shin. Might be a little bit different for you. This side. A little bit different or a lot different. Now, one note, if your back knee is really giving you trouble here, there's a few ways you can work around it, but for today, I would probably just recommend leaning back a bit further. Yeah, so that there's a little less torque on the knee. You could also play with bending that back knee a little bit so the heel comes towards your butt. Sometimes even it feels better to straighten the leg a little bit. It's just basically you need to find an angle that is just not painful for your nervous system, not a threat. And then as you find that end range position, go ahead and use your hand or a block to just distract the hip a little bit. Again, that's an option, not required, but this can help you open up a little more space in that back hip. And then lightly start pressing that back heel into the floor. Track that contraction into that deep part of your hip and add to it the knee pressure into the floor. Begin ramping up both to 30% effort. 40, 50% rotational effort, 60% effort. Hold it right there. So you definitely feel like you could put more effort into it, but you're just being conservative for now. Trying to talk to that deepest part of your hip joint for another 3, 2, 1, and relax. Let that contraction flow away and sit a little deeper into the stretch. Just explore, what does your hip able to do? What is it able to do into rotation? All right, and round 2, light pressure with that back ankle, adding pressure with the back knee. And as you begin ramping up pressure, imagine that your foot was strong enough to move the floor out of the way. It would essentially go through the floor if you were able to rotate your thigh. And use that directive to add tension up to 40% effort, 50, 60% effort, and hold on there, not letting the knee creep away from the floor, but definitely feeling that the heel is leading that rotational effort. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and relax, melt it away. Oh, feel the tissue that was just contracting fully relax into a long position. All right, and then come out of that setup. And let's just take a quick moment to check in on rotation. Come on to hands and knees. Just scoot you forward a little bit. Okay, and you're going to flatten your shin against the floor on one side. We're going to do both sides, so it doesn't matter which side you start with. Bend your what will be your working leg, and then really brace your hands heavy into the floor. Okay, so your upper body is going to stay still, your tailbone's not going to move, and start rotating that back thigh back and forth. Just spending 30 seconds here finding complete stops and letting your nervous system come up to date on what kind of space is available in that hip socket. We want to find complete stops where it feels like the body can't contract you into that position anymore. If you feel any pinching or pain at those end range positions, no need to contract into that pain. You just want to go right to where the pain might start and stop there. Last couple reps. Good. Okay, and then set that shin down, flat on the floor so the other foot has room to work. Bend that other knee, and 30 seconds on this side. You might zoom in on the fact that the arm on that moving side is more important in terms of creating tension to keep your tailbone from moving. If that arm is not solidly braced, you might feel that your pelvis is moving back and forth a little bit, and we want to cut that out. Cut it out. Last 10 seconds, finding complete stops, maybe flirting with a cramp at those complete stops if you feel access to that tissue clearly enough. Good. Okay. And relax. So now we're going to take that little upgraded hip joint into full extension. This is where you're going to want your pillow. So if you're using like a bed pillow, you're going to fold it in half so it's nice and thick. And then you're going to get into what we're calling a modified pigeon setup. So you'll have that pillow underneath your stretching side hip. And we're going to put that in there in a second. But see what Hannah's going to do with the other leg. So one leg's going to reach behind. The other leg's kind of going to be in like a half frog type position. You might bend the knee a little bit more than usual. And then there's that open space between her stretching side, we're just going to do the left side first, and the floor, and we want to fill in that space with the pillow. Really kind of wedge it in there so that you feel fully supported. And then once you feel like it's wedged, come down onto your forearms so your back can relax. And here you might adjust the other knee if it's uncomfortable at all. And the goal is really just to get this leg out of the picture. Okay, so when you're in this position, we know that the hip is near end range extension, but I want you to just take a moment to work our way a little deeper into the stretch. So you might start by trying to walk that back leg a little bit further behind you. And this is going to go by feel in terms of it should feel like the front of your hip is opening up a little bit more. That might open up a little more stretch. The other thing that I want you to do is play with moving your back leg out to the side. So if it's your left leg starting with, try to walk your left leg to the left. You can use your foot to kind of walk it out and see if that doesn't open up a little bit different line of stretch. Again, if we're talking psoas, that tissue does flex your hip, but it also moves your leg in and out, abduct and adduct. So by angling the leg out to the side, we can actually pick up a little bit more stretch, usually, of those deep hip flexors. And then once you feel a clear stretch, just start some deep breathing. Another component of those deep hip flexors is that they share muscle fibers with your diaphragm. So if you're really doing some nice deep diaphragmatic breaths, you have the opportunity of interacting with that hip flexor tissue. Okay. All right, now from this position, we're going to do a little isometric training. So brace your upper body strong, maybe 2 fists pinning into the floor. Feel like a muscly statue in your upper body. And then imagine that we've super glued your back knee and back foot to the floor. And you're going to start trying to drag that floor forward. Nothing's going to move. At the same time as you're trying to bring the floor forward, also try to sweep the leg back behind you. So it's almost like pulling in towards your midline. And those are both options to help you specifically contract where you were feeling the stretch. All right, so this is definitely a go by feel moment. Ramp up that contraction up to 30%, 40%, 50%, and 60%. And we're going to do a little bit longer hold here. As you're feeling that effort, keep reminding yourself of the super glued nature of your knee and your foot. So nothing is moving, but you're trying to drive that leg through the floor and back towards your midline. Give it another 10 seconds. Now when we get to 0, I'm going to ask you to try to turn on a rails contraction in the other direction. So stay braced here. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Use your upper body brace, and now think of lifting your back leg. It's not going to move, but think of lifting it and reaching it further out to the side. You have a chance here to feel some very clear glute contraction, some hamstring contraction, some side butt contraction. All of that is fair game, and use that upper body to help you think of lifting your back leg. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and relax. Okay? Wowzer. All right. Butt cramp. Congratulations, Hannah. Okay, it's actually hard tissue to cramp. It's a really good thing if you can find it. You good for another round?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to
Such a weird feeling.
stay in this position, and if you have felt like you now are not in stretch, you might try walking that foot out to the side a little further, or I invite you to add on a straight arm setup. Now this doesn't always feel good if your back doesn't like an extended position, but sometimes this can be just the ticket to get a little bit more stretch in those deepest hip flexors. I always joke that it's literally your tenderloin tissue, if you're a pork tenderloin fan or whatever. This is your tenderloin tissue that we are stretching. Okay, now from this stretch position, just take another few deep breaths, and this can feel very end range. It is not uncommon to have an emotional reaction to deep hip flexor stretching. So if you need to take a little break, if you need to have some emotional feelings, you are welcome to that. And that's totally normal for this type of stretching and training. All right, and then we're going to light up a second Pales rails contraction. So again, imagine kneecap and foot are super glued. Begin pushing them down into the floor. And really notice how the more pressure you create, the more your arms have to push back. That's the only way that nothing moves. We even out the tension from both sides of the body, ramp up that pressure into the floor, that pales contraction to 40%, 50%, 60%, 70%, and now 80% effort for 15 seconds. Hold it. Imagine you're trying to pin down the floor with 80 pounds of pressure through that back foot. Really contracting right where you feel the stretch. 5, 4, 3, 2, stay super braced and strong, and now think rails contraction. What would it take to lift your foot and your knee off the ground? What would it take to sweep the floor more to your left? 5, 4, cramp your glute if you can. 3, heavy hands. 2, 1, and slowly melt away your effort. Great stuff. All right, and then go ahead, come out of this position and just make your way into hands and knees again. We're going to immediately, right after the fact, give that left leg, that left hip a little input.
Holy moly.
A little different feeling from side to side. Yeah, side to side is going to feel very different. So pin down your right shin to the floor and then start up those same capsule rotations. Again, saving and uploading this new and improved setup.
Feels great.
If you can't hear, Hannah is saying, it feels great. Great salesperson for Kinstretch. Good, a couple more here.
Really frees up my external rotation. So interesting.
Great stuff. Okay, and relax it. I'm gonna have you swing around on this side. So we're gonna get the other side in here. Again, find that half frog type shape with your, what now is your left leg. And then wedge that pillow in between your pelvis area, the front of your hip, and the floor. Okay, now one component here that can really help you find a stretch is the tilt of your pelvis. So just like our spinal car, think of curling your tailbone under, and that will actually lengthen out the front of your hip as well. So you can use that to kind of wedge yourself into a little more hip extension. And then again, we can also play with that back leg, reaching out to the right, and that will pull things onto tension. We say it almost every class, but every body is different. So there must be a component in which you are reaching into what you're feeling and seeking out those long stretching tissues. You will not get the benefits of Kinstretch by just following along or making the same shapes that Hannah is making. You really do need to take that time and find the stretch where it presents in your body. So please take that time. Use some breathing to help you guide a relaxed sensation into those stretch tissues. It's super common for people to very rarely actually stretch their hip flexors, their deep hip flexors. That's why we like this position so much. So just take your time and kind of luxuriate there. It might feel really, really nice to finally get some space and length in that tissue. All right. So take another deep breath. Use that breath to brace your upper body. Turn that upper body tissue into a muscly statue. And then begin lightly pressing your back knee and foot into the floor. It's helpful to think of those points as super glute again so that you can imagine pulling the floor forward with that back leg. And use those cues to specifically create tension and contraction in the tissue you were just stretching. For your pales contraction, ramp that pales effort up to 40% effort, 50% effort, 60% effort is where we will park it. You can think 60 pounds of pressure into the floor with that back knee and that back foot, holding it, trying to communicate with that long stretch tissue. 5, 4, 3, keep your body braced. 2, Use that brace now to rails contract. Think of lifting your back leg and reaching it more out to the right so that you're specifically now communicating with the back side of the hip, the glute and side glute tissue. Really ramping that up as much as you can and using it to try to open up more stretch into the pillow. Hold it 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, and relax. Good. And as you melt it away, sometimes the same position might not feel like an end range position. So take a moment, take some breaths, walk your back leg more out to the side. That's one option. You could curl your tailbone under a little bit more. That's another option. Or you could come up to straight arms. All these are options, not required. But somewhere in there, you should be able to find, oh yeah, a little bit more length feeling in the front of your hip stuff. And I should just be specific real quick. If we had x-ray, that tissue would start somewhere behind your belly button, go through your pelvis, and attach somewhere on your inner thigh on the front of your hip. So when I say the front of the hip, I mean that general area, but like 1 to 3 inches deep into your tissue. Again, tenderloin. Maybe we call this class the tenderloin class.
I love it. Tenderloin alchemy.
Nice. Okay, now from this newly more stretched position, let's do our second round of Pales Rails. Begin pressing that back foot and knee down into the floor. And then if you have some out to the side shape with that back leg, also think down and across, like kind of at a 45-degree angle into the floor. Make sure your arms are pushing back with some real strength so that you can ramp up the pressure on that back leg to 40%, 50%, 60%, 70%, and 80% this round. That's quite a bit of effort. Resist your body trying to relax. Keep your hands really strong. Keep that back foot very heavily pressed. 4, 3, 2, keep your tension, and now rails contract. Think of lifting that back leg, moving that back thigh even further behind you, and opening up more stretch into the pillow. Give me 5 more seconds of real strong quality effort. 4, 3, 2, 1, and melt it away. Good stuff. Okay, gently make your way out of this position, taking your time, moving in a way that feels good to your body, including splat on the mat. Blup. Okay, and then we'll get into quadruped again for a little capsule rotation of that right thigh. Brace your body. Left shin presses into the floor, and then begin your rotation. Again, noticing how this is different than when we did these previously. Great. Okay. Now we're going to finish off with some 90-90 work again, but now for the front leg, for external rotation. Maybe you heard Hannah mention this, but one side effect of really creating and exploring some length in the front of the hip is that that tissue now is much more effective at shortening and contracting, which is what we're going to do in this 90-90 setup. So go ahead, find a 90-90 position. This time, your pillow is going to want to go underneath your front knee. Unless you're someone who you know you have a lot of hip external rotation available to you, and you are able to just place the front knee on the floor, I really do want you to use a pillow under that front knee. And then if you'd like, you can tuck in that back knee, bring it forward a little bit. Again, just so it's out of the picture. It's not part of the equation here. And then we're going to hunt for a stretch in hip external rotation. So you can find that by making a nice long spine, leaning forward, and think of lifting your tail feathers as you reach your belly button for your kneecap. Okay? So there's somewhat of a temptation to just let your spine round over and relax towards your knee, but we want to keep the spinal column relatively fixed and just lean forward from the hip joint. So it's like a hinge right at your hip. Okay? And then from here, hopefully you're feeling a stretch through the back side of your hip, your hamstring, your glute, and deep to your back pocket on this left leg. We're just going to explore a little bit of the contraction of those tissues. So you can slip your hand underneath your foot, wherever it feels comfortable, under the heel or the forefoot, and just lightly begin to pull up on that foot, but resist with your leg strength. So that combination should help you feel a rotational effort through that thigh so that the ankle is pushing roughly against the floor. This is your pales contraction. Okay. Now take that hand away and place it on the floor instead, so you really anchor onto the floor. And instead of making the ankle heavy into the floor, now try to reverse the rotation and make that ankle feel light on the floor. Okay? So now you're trying to rotate your thigh the other way. And if you can use that contraction or that directive to feel the hip crease tissue really shortening and contracting. Try to use that contraction to pull your spine into even more of a forward lean. So you're not leaning forward passively now, but you're actively pulling yourself to your end range of hip external rotation. All right. Okay, relax here. Let it go. So we're going to use those two contractions to start introducing a little movement here. So stay forward. You're at end range. Begin that pales contraction, front foot pushing down into the floor, feeling rotation of your thigh to help you do that. And really ramp that up to a nice strong effort. I like to imagine that I'm using so much effort that I could take my hands away from the floor. Okay, and then begin to use that pressure into the floor to bring your spine upright, nice and slow, so that you're continuing to communicate with the glute tissue in the back of your hip. Keep pressing the floor away with that front leg until your shoulders are over your pelvis, and then pause. Switch your directive on that front leg. Now try to make your front ankle light, try to rotate your thigh in the other direction, and use that to begin pulling your spinal column forward and closing the angle actively on the front of your hip. Active, 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 all the way to your end range. This is a kinetic stretch. If you're familiar with that terminology, brace. Start pressing that front shin and ankle into the floor. Use that new contraction to begin driving yourself out of your end range position. Keep the pressure up through that front knee. So I couldn't pry the knee off the floor, couldn't pry the ankle off the floor because you're actively pushing it down. Keep that pressure up until your shoulders are over your pelvis. Then pause and switch the contraction. Try to make that ankle light, make that knee light. Try to pull your belly button towards your knee actively. Each rep is a new opportunity to pull yourself into a deeper end range position. Then pause, create your pales contraction, push the ground away. Push, 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 push. Good. And last rep, begin pulling yourself forward, trying to cramp your inner thigh tissue. That same stuff that we were just stretching is now functioning to get short for you. Pulling, 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 go all the way to a complete stop. Find that complete stop, hold that complete stop, and then melt the effort away. Good. And you can use your arms to come out of this position and set up on the other side. Very nice. Okay, I'll switch sides too. Okay, so here, find that pillow under your front knee. Take a moment to make your spine nice and tall so that your spine isn't rounding, And then as you begin moving forward, think of reaching your belly button forward so that the motion is happening right at your hip crease. Yeah, good. And even once you think you can't go any further, you might be able to bow a little bit more stretch in your glute area by trying to lift your tail feathers a little bit higher. And there are some other kind of tweaks you can play with on that front leg, but the goal is to create as much stretch through the back of the hip as possible. All right, and then from this position, let's just check in on the isometric contractions that we have available here. Begin pushing your front ankle and knee down into the floor. Feel that pales contraction light up the tissue that was just stretching. Good, get a feel for that. We're going to use that in a moment. But for now, reverse the rotation and think of making that front ankle and knee light, pulling away from the floor and towards your chest. This should send a signal to turn on the tissue on the front of your right hip. Using that contraction to try to pull yourself deeper into this stretch. Good. All right. Now, relax. We're going to get started with another set of kinetic stretches. Just turn on that pales contraction, front leg pressure into the floor, and utilize the pales contraction to begin bringing your spine upright, away from your front leg. So you're pushing yourself with control out of end range. Now with this much tension, it would be easy to pop up quickly, but I want you to go slow. Good. Once your shoulders are over your pelvis, pause, reverse the rotation. Feel that front of your hip stuff begin to work to pull or pry your spine forward into your deepest stretch. So it's no longer passively stretching into your end range. You're actively pulling yourself to your end range. Pause at end range. Create a pales contraction into the floor, into the pillow, and use that to bring your spine back upright. Keep the pressure up even as your shoulders get tall. Pause in that tall position. Reverse the rotation of your thigh bone and use that to pull you even deeper. Good. Moving slow and really clarifying for your body where your hip joint is and how you can control and contract those tissues around your hip joint. Very nice. Pause, pales, and push. Great stuff. This is your final pales contraction. Really spend what you've got. Pushing the floor away, pushing your shoulders tall. Keep pushing, pushing, pushing. Once you're upright, pause, and here's your final rails contraction. Think of what it would take to actually lift your front ankle off the floor, and then what would it take to actually reach your belly button towards your front kneecap. Good. Really keep sending those signals to your body and see what new sensations present themselves. Good. Pulling yourself all the way to your end range. When you hit a complete stop, keep working, trying to fight for just 1% more, and relax, melt away the effort. And we're going to finish up in quadruped one final time to finish uploading that work. So just as we were working before, one shin presses down, the other knee bends, and begin your capsule rotation. Good. 30 seconds here, finding complete stops at each end range rotation. Good, very nice. Noticing how things feel a little different than when you started. Noticing how you're able to connect with different sensations more effectively. Good. Let that leg relax. Take a breath, brace your upper body, bend your right knee, and rotate that side. Sometimes it can be helpful to think of this rotation as moving your hamstring to face different directions. Rotation is a tough concept to really get into your body, into your brain, so you can think of many different visualizations. So just turning that back of your thigh one way and then turning the back of your thigh to face the other way. That can sometimes help unlock some new sensation. Five, 4, 3, 2, 1, and done. All right. Thank you, team, very much. As always, we'd love to hear how that class felt, and we'll see you again soon.